Thanks for joining. My name is Chris Michaels. I'm with Wowza Media Systems. I am the streaming industry evangelist, director of communications, and guy with a lot of little pretty words in his mouth. My job is to keep us in the news for good reasons, keep us out of the news for bad, and tell you all some of the fun stuff that I've been picking up around the marketplace. One of the things that, well, you may be asking is, Wowza getting in the blockchain business? The official answer is no. This is actually more of an analysis of a lot of the things that have been happening, that we've been seeing happen in the marketplace that we're being made aware of by customers who are saying, how can I build a lot of services for the media industry? While we power, 30 million hours of live video a day, today blockchain isn't a part of our offering. It doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be. So a quick show of hands, people here, how many people own any sort of cryptocurrency? Hey, we actually have a fair number. How many people have mined for coins? So about half of those. And how many people have themselves developed any sort of blockchain solution? So you know more than me. I'm just going to let you know that. I don't claim to be an expert in blockchain. I'm actually always skeptical of people who claim to be experts in anything. So I'm at heart a researcher. I'm a solutions architect, and I consider myself more of a futurist of potential applications of the new technologies. So blockchain for me is one of the most exciting and confusing technologies that has had such a major boon over the past couple of years. In fact, the sheer volatility of the cryptocurrency markets itself should say a lot. You know, one day it's up to $20,000, the next day it's $5,000, or maybe it might have been in the last hour that drop happened. This past January, the volatility of the market even showed itself more. I was at the Digital Money Forum at the Consumer Electronics Show, and there were about 50 blockchain companies all pitching their next ICO or independent coin offerings, or talking about their blockchain technologies. And in just 5 months later, only 10 of them are still around. One of them had a major promise of them and is actually still around, but has completely shifted. That's VidCoin. Originally promised to be the new video content distribution network powered by blockchain, and has now shifted to be a blockchain ad network. So they're still in the video space, but now they're doing something completely different where they might actually make some money. It's moving fast, and to be honest, we're all behind the curve if we're trying to build something today, but let's at least take a look at it. Blockchain, let's just look at a general definition. It's a permanent distributed record of transactions, or a ledger, between a network of participants, and each entry in this ledger is governed by predefined rule set, and thus verified. And the network can either be public, built on something like a Bitcoin or Ethereum or Ripple, or private, and you can even still use some of those technologies to build private networks. In its simplest form, blockchain is what I call a shared supply chain, from product creation to sales to consumption in an open, verifiable marketplace. That's the easiest way to look at it. And what's an easier way to look at it? Pineapples and corporate bonds. That's not really easy, is it? In general, just because you hear the term blockchain, you should think of companies more as a supply chain and not somebody who's buying and selling cryptocurrencies. Within a blockchain or with any supply chain, you have in this case, a blockchain network, the blockchain code, what defines that network and how it's going to talk, and then the shared ledger. In a, everybody likes examples, so I put these two here, right? So we've got pineapples and corporate bonds. And I'm no expert in pineapples, though they are delicious, nor corporate bonds. But I can think it's fair to expect that the contracts that govern the exchange of these two types of items, right, could be completely different from each other. So that would be our blockchain code. What defines the difference between how these different transactions are happening? And blockchain networks, on the other hand, may be very similar. Each has a consortium of, say, 3 different organizations, whatever type of business they're doing, and they all need similar things and verify them against one another. So that's very similar in the different types of blockchain networks that may be developed. Since I don't know more about corporate bonds than I love eating pineapples, let's talk about my hot pineapple network. Okay, we'll just make this as an example. In this case, we have, say, 3 ledgers that have to verify the transactions using the same code, and pineapples through the supply chain, okay? Every copy of the ledger is called a peer, and every peer can validate the transaction called a consensus. So in this case, I've got my pineapple farmer who sends things through a pineapple courier, shipping and receiving, who sends those to the final buyer. It might be you who wants my delicious pineapple. But then there's also the ordering service for you to request it. And since I'm going to call this the hot pineapple network. You can only get the hot stuff that's coming off of the big island right now. It's really hot with all the lava. You have to be a member. So I have to have a verification way or a membership service provider to hold a certificate that says you're allowed to buy and you're allowed to get it through this network, okay? And that's, it's going to hold the certification, blockchain, yes, peers, yes. I lost my train of thought on here. But you also need a way to distribute and validate fast via your peers, and you need a way to process orders from anyone within a network. Those are 2 things that are critical within this. So you have your ordering service and a way to verify that. To do that, the blockchain networks use smart contracts. And yes, this is a ugly smart contract diagram that comes from Hyperledger, but it actually really defines the way that the networks themselves define the roles of who or what is participating in a transaction or some sort of exchange of either goods or services that happen within the network. They define those roles. They define what the assets are. In this case, it'll be my pineapples. And finally, there's some sort of a transaction, things that can happen to update the status of the assets which are of importance to some or all of the organizations within the network. And lastly, the contracts also set the rules regarding who can access it, when the item is processed, in the transaction. And so I've got this all defined here. So up at the top, we have, in the model file, it defines what the assets are, the participants, and the transactions. In the script file, the JavaScript file is actually going to have the transaction functions. So this is actually when that transaction is happening. I'm going to have the access control rules that are going to tell me, OK, this person is in the network and can access the ordering system, but also access the item that is being purchased or acquired. And then I'm going to have the query definition. So for this contract, how can I make sure that in a verified network, everybody can find it and know exactly what the transaction record is and know that as we are reaching consensus, we're reaching consensus on the exact same thing. The Business Network Archive essentially packages all that up and makes it available. And then I have, in this case, the Hyperledger Fabric, which is the cloud system that everybody is talking on or through, or the web browser, the Node.js, the online version, which you can actually access it. So how does this work? OK, I got something on my phone, or I want to order it. So the front half here, one party requests a transaction. It actually will then go to the entire peer network. It's been verified. I know I'm part of the network. I can say, I want to request this. That request then goes out to whoever has it on that individual node to then transmit it, verify, approve the transaction, and then bring it back to me through the entire chain. The other thing is that you'll notice this is distributed. This isn't me going one-to-one. This is me going through a network of peers or nodes that may actually have it, and I can access it all at the same time. How many people used Napster back in the day? Napster was essentially a blockchain, but for piracy. It was a way for you to actually say, I'm going to download something from Poland or Czechoslovakia or any former Soviet place, or some guy who was dumb enough to put up a node in backwards Indiana, and get it all simultaneously from all these different peers. And that's essentially what blockchain has done, but in this case, it's verifiable. It's public. You have less risk of piracy because you know that what you've purchased is the original content, because that smart contract that you have digitally signed in receiving it has given it a tag and a number and an order so that you can continue to go through and verify. This is a reference architecture from IBM, and actually it's, I like this even as convoluted as it is, in the fact that on this side over here on the left, if you can see the laser pointer, I can't see it because it's blending into the screen on this angle. You have all the components that sit on the application layer. Right? This is the application in which I, in a digital sense, am going to make a request, have a transaction, or talk to the rest of the network. You end up having your cloud network where, all right, I've gone through my edge, and I've gone up to the cloud to then access the rest of the secure, either private or public blockchain network. And then that goes through, you have your server runtimes, but down here, your entire blockchain service. So I have my membership that says, OK, you're verified, you can come in. I have my consensus, which happens between multiple points on the blockchain. I have the entire ledger that says, I made a request. The request for me to access whatever it was that I got in that asset is valid because I'm the one that purchased it. And I have 3 or more, or whatever rules defines you have set up within your blockchain that can verify that, yes, you are the one person who does it. And then I verified it against the smart contract that's in that asset. And then you actually, as it comes back out, you have your enterprise stack. So if I'm delivering content to the blockchain, this is the way that it goes back in, gets verified, and comes back out. Simple example, Jim. I threw that to Jim, right? You saw me throw it to Jim. You saw me throw it to Jim. You saw me throw it to Jim. We have consensus. That's what the boiled down of what that does. You want to toss it back? You tossed it back. You all see? I've got it here. Now we've got another transaction of consensus. One item, gone through. Everybody saw that it happened. The peers collaborated on it. We have consensus that this belongs to me or belonged to him at the point that we had possession of it. Now I'm allowed to use it. I'm not going to shine lasers at anyone. The shared ledgers speak the same language. In a blockchain network, we're talking about pineapples in my hot pineapple example, right? But why not change the terms for our industry? Media ledgers would talk about the blockchain media network. We have our content creator. We have content distribution. We have the consumer, or at least the end viewer. I'll use a viewer at the end. Who also manages their own individual subscriptions, direct purchases, and the DRM that all happens within the smart contracts. So I guess the biggest question is why consider blockchain for media applications? We talk with 22,000 customers who are sitting there saying, hey, I've got this great app, but I want to monetize it. I want to be able to create a digital currency in order for individuals to create content and incentivize them to create content, or a digital currency for people who are watching content to actually earn something. So now this becomes an advertiser network or a content network that is actually paying people for watching the content, and it becomes a sharing economy. These are a lot of things that actually drive deeper questions, because the deeper questions are about media functions. And there's probably 5 core areas, and I do say 5 core areas because that's even the title of today's talk, in which this applies. First, how do I get my content to my viewers reliably? How do I prevent content from being pirated? How do I sell directly to a viewer or create a subscription service, right? This is eliminating the middleman. I don't have to have a clearinghouse. How do I distribute my content securely? And then lastly, how do I pay talent or content creators faster? Because we don't want to delay. We don't want people sitting there and coming back to us. So take a look at each one of these individually. Since blockchains are decentralized and usually peer-to-peer network, or unless you are building one expensively on your own dime, where you're creating multiple nodes that are repeating everything that you have, there's really no single point of failure and no single access point for a malicious hacker to come in at. Thus, it typically enhances the safety and security of your data and allows for a better distribution model in which I can actually now say, I don't have to suck up all bandwidth in one place. I can share it securely amongst all the peers and all the nodes that are joined in my network. They can share the load. They can share the caching. They can share the resources. Actually, Robert and I were talking about this earlier. If I had a bunch of GPUs that aren't necessarily being used for mining or getting money, what if this became a rendering service, right? So now I've got a shared rendering service using GPU resources that are allocated across the entire network. So the bandwidth is shared. There's no single point of failure, and it's peer distribution. How do I prevent pirated content? So for your DRM, well, the smart contracts provide access controls and validation. There was some independent research done by Ipsos and the University of Portsmouth show that 60% of those who are called pirates are actually at the same time those who spend the most money buying content legally. And that's because effectively they deal with illegal content not because they're alleged criminals or inclinations or flamboyant anarchistic viewpoints, right? It's because they don't have any legal option to access the content that they want. Think of Netflix. What I watch here in the United States is completely different to what I have available in a different region. So that regional accessibility is something that why popcorn time became so popular. Even with the rise of broadband internet and globally available streaming services, the problem of availability remains. Your geographic location is still the decisive factor whether you're entitled to legally watch a film or TV series, even if you're happy to pay for the experience. So if I have something that I can say I'm either limiting in my smart contract, where either via IP address, IPv6, IPv4, whether it's geofencing, but putting limitations within that contract that says I'm allowed to access it when I'm in X location. That's an easier way of getting around because now you've got peers that are validating it, not having to go up through a DRM rule set necessarily that it's set by transcoders or delivery systems or CDNs. You also can't duplicate that authentication in a smart contract because it's a one-time individual use, and the access requires that validation of multiple peers within the network. To the point of retail and sales, how do I get directly to the customer? Well, one, you can eliminate the clearinghouses. I've created a model now that, not I've created, but in my pineapple example, I've created a model in which Terry over here can order a pineapple directly from me. I don't have to go through a wholesaler. I don't have to go through a clearinghouse. I don't have to go through all the different steps in the chain, except for getting it to him, the device, or getting him the pineapple. I can have that one-on-one ordering system. What that does, in turn, is actually drive higher profits. Right? Because now I'm actually, as a content creator, if I want to sell something myself directly to you, I don't have to give 30% to Apple or Amazon or Google or 50% depending on what the royalties are of whatever service I'm driving on. I can also create some really unique subscription services or even resale markets. Now, resale markets is something that recently came up because a lot of people sit there and say, I have half of my digital library from Google Play or Amazon that I'm never going to watch again. So how do I get rid of this junk or get some of my money back? So now I've got a way for me to potentially say, hey, I've got this asset, I'm done with it. I can transfer that smart contract to somebody else at whatever price is negotiated within the network. And you can do that leveraging smart wallets. You can do that leveraging digital currencies. If you want to talk about cryptocurrencies, you can do that within a tokenized workframe. We talked about distribution, but more specifically, security. So network access controls authenticate all the managers and actors within your blockchain network. The peers within the application as well can continue to authenticate it, and your infrastructure security. Now, the infrastructure security is an interesting one because a lot of people are sitting there wondering, how do I create encryption? How do I look at using public key, PKI, or KSI infrastructures? And I'll talk about that later or in just a little bit as well. But there are a lot of technologies that are on the rise to actually create encryption around it. And there's also an amount of privacy and public scrutiny of what happens within the network. Privacy happens because I can sit there and say, I, as an individual user, have a unique hash, but nobody knows what my hash is. And so my hash in terms of access on that smart contract is actually going to be verifiable through the rest of the network. I don't have to give away my IP address necessarily for access, and I don't have to give away my identity so that any malicious person can sit there and know exactly what my email address or however the authentication happens within accessing it. The other side of that is there is a public record. So again, to the security point, if somebody is spoofing it, if you can't spoof the smart contract that is uniquely mine, has my unique signature on it, has a timestamp, has all the individual identifiers for the transaction that has happened within the network, or even my access into the network. You can't fake it in many of the instances using KSI over PKI. PKI also, or KSI, by the way, is also searching to replace the old RSA standards for PKI access, in which you have an asynchronous token or hash that is randomly generated. And by randomly, I mean it's been hacked, what, 4 times? RSA has been hacked, what, 4 times? So the random number generators can always be spoofed. In the KSI format, it doesn't necessarily do that. The last part is, how can I pay my talented creators faster? In a blockchain media network, there are multiple ways in which you can either incentivize, pay, or get people in there. You can have a viewer to creator, a platform to creator, thus I'm paying you for providing content on here. I can have the consumer to the platform, but all that happens in real time. You don't have to sit there and wait for a credit card machine to batch process and verify through a banking service, which actually the banking services use third-party services to make sure that everything clears, and then that goes back through, and there's actually a longer tail delay in that credit card processing. It's also hidden behind walls that you can't see what's going on in the verification process. If you're using a block, if you're using a token or a coin-based system, that all happens on the ledger, and then that coin then either becomes transferable to the asset owner or whoever submitted it, like the creator or the publisher or the consumer. One thing I didn't have on here was platform to consumer, because there's a lot of platforms now that also, like I mentioned earlier, you're on here, I'm going to incentivize you for continuing, this is the mining for content, for you having your system up so we can share those resources. Did my machine go to sleep? We can share those. Oh, I lost power. Yep, that one should work. Thank you. I can share those resources through the network and keep people using the system. So now we've got oh, there it is. It's way down there. Power, yay. Come back up. Technical difficulties of being on multiple panels back to back. Drained my battery in the last one, man. Come on. Get 1% battery, come on. Yes, it's coming back up. No, that's not what I want to see. It's just giving me the power icon. La 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 la. No, I wish it was that easy. It's just literally giving me the power icon. It's waiting for enough power to boot up. And I was just about to go into companies that are getting it right for you, and I can't memorize them off the top of my head. I gotta believe in my machine. As much as I keep hitting the power button, it's just not coming up. You're plugged in. You have a light. Why are you not booting? Yeah, so while this is booting up, yeah, while this is booting up, hey, it's coming up. There we go. Does that resonate? Thus far, are we on page? Does anybody have questions thus far? Yeah, go ahead.
We went over this also many times in our company.
Yeah.
And how can we do this with blocking for video? At the end of the day, all the engineers come back and say, somebody can do a screen capture, and everything goes out of the window. Preventing piracy.
So yes and no. It depends on how you're containing the access. Some of that on a player side, you can always actually, if it's web-based, you can always turn off accessibility to some additional services. If it's HTML5 based, I know you can always turn off your screen capture. You can turn off the some of the runtime services that happen. But you're right. That is one thing. Somebody can pirate your screen. You're still going to have that issue. But what you won't have is pirated content flowing through your distribution chain. So that's one thing that, you know, do I have to, and the other element is is there a way to watermark it? Right? That's one thing actually that the Streaming Video Alliance has been looking at, is how do we talk about watermarking that content in order to prevent a lot of the piracy within that. And if you're watermarking it, you can also trace it back. So how are you watermarking it? What information are you putting back in there? How and can that invalidate the smart contract, and thus either invalidate the person accessing it and person's off the entire network, or is that just invalidating that entire smart contract for that one item? Come on. You can do it. I know you can. Is it giving me a sign-in screen on that one?
There you go.
Hey, there we go. Aha. So one of the other things, how do we pay our content creators faster? Another element of it is the advertising revenues. So advertising revenues in some networks are actually shared amongst the peers, as well as to the individuals who are creating the content. So now you can see the record, you can see how much it's in there, but you can have better performance metrics for advertising. So now we're not just guessing that we're going to have a viewership of 1,000 people. Now I know exactly how many people access the content, when it happened, how it happened, whether I'm serving the right kind of ads, if it's using IPv6, am I dynamically delivering a regional specific advertisement. So if this is, let's say, a network that allows me to deliver video and video ads for sports, and somebody's watching a local team, but they're out of market. Do I want to send them the video for that local team, or do I want to send them the video for where they're actually accessing it from? Because if I'm sitting in California, I don't want to see an ad for Ted Britt Ford in the DC area. I want to see something that's close to me. So how do you navigate a lot of that? You can also support either actual currencies or cryptocurrencies, and then also gamify the content creation process. Incentivize people to give CryptoKitties or tokens or digital items within a video creation, like Lively. They've created a crypto system where now I can give directly to my creators in real time and provide them royalties for providing the content. So who's getting it right? Whoop, I went too far. These are just actually picked at not anybody who's getting everything right, but getting specific parts right. I can't sit there and say that there's one be-all solution across the board. Most of these examples, however, will use Ethereum, which is one of the more popular blockchain technologies that are out there. And you can build both private and public blocks, blockchain networks within it. So I want to say Descent. I know it's written as Decent. They are a CDN, which has also issued their own tokens for transactions. White Rabbit, as an ecosystem, consists of users and content right holders and creators, so from a DRM perspective, partner sites and third-party developers, and they offer personalized content libraries. So now I've got one individual content library for me, a browser plugin, and then they separating the distribution from the payment. They're offering a single payment system, but an infinite viewing and fan experiences. Flixo, and I've got two here for retail and sales. One specifically for video, and the other one here is for audio. Flixo allows creators to use smart contracts to determine how much they're going to charge for people to view their videos. But they'll also use smart contracts to determine what percentage of the revenue they'll set aside for users who join the network, and thus seeding the video content throughout the network. Voice, they are a music streaming download platform. They aim to monetize independent artists. Their business model actually distributes 100% of all revenue that comes through that back to the artist. So now, again, kicking out a lot of the middlemen, kicking out a lot of distribution, a lot of problems the music industry has, and reason why Spotify, got a $150 million lawsuit, is how much they were taking. How about for security? Guard Time is the KSI company I was talking about earlier. They're Estonian-based. They've created KSI. It stores hashes of the original data and files on the blockchain and verifies other copies by running the hash algorithms and comparing the results to what's stored. So they're doing an entire hashing system and comparing the hashing throughout the network. Any manipulation of the data quickly discovered because the original hash exists in millions of nodes. For Viewly and royalties, so this is interesting. We have Viewly and Viewly. Viewly with W, they rely on content creators to power the platform. They serve as the nexus for building up communities of fans who wish to support their work. And in the end, creators can set up private channels and subscription services to offer additional content to users who meet various pay thresholds. On them, creators can also free from any outside they are free from any outside interference when it comes to advertising, so they can freely enter into sponsorship deals that they want to. So that's another revenue generation model for them. Viewly with You, all payments on the platform are actually done automatically from their tokens, and the transaction history is stored in the blockchain, but they transfer that value directly between advertisers, content creators, and users in real time, and actually are doing it in a way that is pretty unique. You actually watch one of their videos and their descriptions of it. I like the way that they talk about how they are processing the payments and making sure that if somebody watches something at a later date, they can still actively gain royalties and residuals for later usage. So, implementation considerations. We talked about one earlier about screen capture. The fact of the matter is there are challenges. Scalability is going to be the biggest challenge. If you're creating something from scratch today, ramping up for load, and also building a user base for people is going to be your hardest thing, unless you're using an existing blockchain network. One other thing about scalability is updates. Updates take a while across a distributed network. For Ethereum, they've stated that their next course of updates are going to take 6 to 12 months. Because it's so broad. That's just one issue. Trust is another issue. Just in fact, how many people have talked with somebody who thinks that cryptocurrency is all a hacker ploy to steal more money from us? And that's actually, you walk out in the street today and ask people what they think of cryptocurrency, they'll probably tell you the same thing. Like, oh, that's not for me. Or if they are mining, they own Bitcoin, chances are they're a nerd like us or me, right? They understand it. So there's a shortcoming that you have to go through educating the public about what it is. Also, you have to teach the power of decentralization and control. What happens in the background in the current media ecosystem that we don't see, that means that the artists down the road who are creating the content are getting ripped off. Right? Is that something that they need to be aware of, and how do you make them aware of it, or how do you pull the heartstrings to say, you guys really should care about the artists because you're going to their concerts, you're buying their stuff. make sure that they get a fair wage. Development is another issue. To be honest, there's a shortage of coders. There's a shortage of people who understand Ethereum. There's not a shortage of people who know JavaScript. There's not a shortage of people who understand some of the basic principles in coding all this. But to my point at the very beginning, there are far and few between people who are experts in developing for blockchain. So you have to look at cross-applying a lot of skill sets. It's also, for private networks, you're going to need both front-end and network infrastructure. So if you're starting from scratch, I need an app. I need something that people are going to interface with. I need a web interface, or at least some portal by which I'm going to make a transaction. But at the same time, I need that whole network infrastructure piece in place, or else I'm not going to be able to get anything from point A to point B, verify, validate, and make my financial payments. So you have to have the entire network infrastructure. So the other point is that, and the last slide is a little small, coins are volatile. I mentioned it earlier, like the fact that price can drop $15,000 in a day for a coin, or however much has happened in the last 10 minutes. This is actually Bitcoin's 1 week rise and fall, as high as $9,800 to as low as $9,000. That's an $800 swing. Ethereum, the 746.56, in 24 hours went up and down by 70% of its, or I'm sorry, by in a daily change from up to it's cut off on here. It goes up to $770, but as low as $721. Like, it happens so quickly that what I have negotiated as a payment, that you're going to pay me one kitty cat. Well, one kitty cat today might be 10 kitty cats in an hour. And so what I've negotiated for the payment and the value of that transaction can fluctuate. And the only way that you can actually manage that is to have a contained volume of assets. And then once I've made a transaction, it is that coin that was used for that transaction expires, and a new one is reissued to maintain a specific set threshold of available assets. You can extend it more per asset that comes on. Maybe you make more available, but that's the only way right now to maintain a level of accuracy within that, is to contain the availability. Many of the ICOs that are coming out, we're going to issue 10 million. Now we're going to issue another 5 million. We're going to issue another 10 million. And they keep building on as almost a get-rich-quick scheme, which invalidates the generic value of your token overall. So those are the challenges, the implementation. I guess the other questions you got, Coin, or questions at that point. Again, mind you, I'm no blockchain expert. I'm a guy who's done a lot of research and can look at the future and say, this is something that we can implement. And this is something across the board. Nobody's fixing every problem that the media organizations today are facing. But we can look at blockchain as potentially solving for security, distribution, DRM, access control, retail, and payments. Like, those are things that we can see being solved today through this technology. Now, does anybody want to raise their hand and volunteer to build the whole thing? I'm putting mine down quickly. Terry's looking around. He's like, I want to get in on that. Any questions? Terry.
So one of the burning questions is, can this replace the classical DRM system for protection, or you believe they have to work together, like Bitcoin being more a control plane and DRM being more the data plane?
Yeah, so the question for those who are watching online is this going to be a complete replacement for DRM, or does it have to work in cohorts with other existing technologies? And I think it's more the latter. There are needs for implementation of DRM, KSI infrastructures for access, as well as how do you protect and hash and authenticate each individual copy of something that's coming out, right? Because if I'm sending out a million DVDs, not everyone's going to have an identifier on that unless I'm looking at the fine print and the little circle there of the DVD. But even their DVD readers won't read that. In the case of a digital copy, how do we create a hash or something that protects where you can get it, how you can get it, what identifies you as the user who can access it, how do I resell it, but keeping me as the owner as the one who's able to access that content. So there are certain technologies that are available today that I think can work in consort with new blockchain technologies. It's a matter of implementation. And since a lot of this is also JavaScript based in existing code bases, it's easy to combine some of those technologies in programmatic format. Any other questions?
When you mentioned those vendors, do you see any player that's kind of doing it all, or is it kind of siloed out? I'm doing DRM, I'm doing security.
So
I don't want to manage 5 different.
exactly. Nobody wants to manage 5 different blockchain. The question is there a one size fits all, right? Today, I haven't seen any. Each of these examples that I pointed to earlier, just about every single one talks about their ability to solve some of the problem, and maybe not all of the problem, but they do address each of the core concerns of a media organization. So if I want to go to decent descent, I don't know how we're going to call it. If I went to them and say I'm going to build on the Descent network, and they have 4 or 5 other vendors within that blockchain network. It's kind of also Ethereum. Many of this is based on the Ethereum stack. So I'm maintaining one blockchain infrastructure, but I'm creating specific use cases using either components thereof, my vendors, in order to maintain one comprehensive solution.
So if they're on one coin.
Yeah, if they're on one coin or yes, you can. Sir in the back. I had to look behind you.
There's somebody behind me. No, I've been following a lot of this stuff, and I think on your problem side, it's more of a comment. I think another one you probably should add up is the regulations around this stuff.
And it's also a concern. Regulations you mentioned. Yeah. So ICOs are becoming an issue partly because of regulation. SEC, is the SEC going to crack down on cryptocurrencies? You know, that is a big concern. Is a digital currency is something that's making an exchange of an actual financially backed solution to a digitally backed solution. Is that actually verifiable? Can we track it? Can we monitor it? Can we regulate it? Part of that is, can we tax it as well, right? That becomes a government's concern with it. But you know, to the same point, that's also a consumer's concern, because the amount of buzz that happens about uncertainty of digital currencies, then will the consumer, from a consumer's perspective, will they then doubt the veracity of a blockchain-based solution? So there's an overcoming that happens both in the general populace and the mindset, as well as a regulatory concern that may be actual or just ethereal today. Awesome. That about does it for me then. Thank you all for coming out.